Muito bom dia a todos e a todas, sejam muito bem-vindos ao primeiro workshop Estratégias para a Redução de Capturas Incidentais de Toninhas, Oportunidades e Desafios. Meu nome é Marta Kremer e sou coordenadora deste workshop e vou mediar essa atividade. Ele é organizado pelo Projeto Toninhas do Brasil, realizado pela Universidade da Região de Joinville, a Univille, e financiado pela Fundação de Amparo, Pesquisa e Inovação do Estado de Santa Catarina, a FAPESC. Agradeço a todos os parceiros que contribuíram para a realização desse evento. Comigo estão também aqui o Renan Paitache, que vai nos ajudar com as perguntas do público, e o João Lázaro, que é o nosso diretor técnico. Agradeço também a toda a equipe que está nos bastidores conosco, a Naira, o Gabriel, João Miguel, Jimmy, Luísa e Vanessa. Essa atividade dentro do Zoom conta com interpretação simultânea entre inglês, português e libras. Caso você esteja assistindo pelo YouTube e tenha necessidade desses recursos de acessibilidade, verifique na descrição do vídeo as orientações de como solicitar acesso à plataforma Zoom. Para iniciarmos, eu vou me autodescrever. Sou uma mulher de pele branca, de cabelo escuro, uso uma camisa azul e óculos de grau. Estou em meu escritório. Conosco na tela também estão as intérpretes de Libras. A Hannah, que é uma mulher branca, de cabelo castanho, blusa preta e fundo branco. E a Sofia, mulher parda, de cabelo castanho encaracolado, blusa preta e fundo de parede branca. Pedimos para nossos convidados também se autodescreverem quando iniciarem suas falas. A atividade que estamos iniciando agora é a Conferência 2, Habitat Protection for Cetaceans Around the World, que será apresentada pelo Dr. Erich Hoyt. Para darmos início à nossa conversa de hoje, chamo então o nosso convidado da atividade e vou apresentá-lo. O Erich Hoyt é pesquisador colaborador da ONG Whale and Dolphin Conservation, na Inglaterra, e coordena o WDC Global Critical Habitat Marine Protected Area Program, e também é co-diretor do Far East Russia Orca Project, na península de Kamchatka. Hoyt é membro do grupo especialista em cetáceos da Comissão de Sobrevivência de Espécies da União Internacional para a Conservação da Natureza, a IUCN, e é co-diretor da Força Tarefa de Áreas Protegidas de Mamíferos Marinhos da IUCN. Hoyt é o autor de mais de 40 artigos científicos e 25 livros. Seus trabalhos foram traduzidos para 15 línguas em 25 países. Em 2013, recebeu o Prêmio de Conservação Mandy McMath da Sociedade Europeia de Cetáceos. Bom dia, Dr. Erich Hoyt. Seja muito bem-vindo e é um grande prazer contar com sua participação nesse workshop. Muito obrigada. Então, podemos iniciar com a fala, então, com a conferência do Dr. Erich Hoyt.
Hello. I'm going to talk about protecting habitats for whales, dolphins, and porpoises. I hope the global view on this may help shed some light on strategies for protection of Franciscana. It all started in 1973, getting to know orcas as individuals. The photo ID technique pioneered by Mike Bigg, beginning in the 1970s, opened all these doors. Now, this is a photo of a male killer whale we called Wavy, A3, going into Robson Bight on a typical day in August in the 1970s. There were no boats, really idyllic situation, an unlogged, untouched river valley called the Sitka River. Paradise. Says it all for me. And this bay, Robson Bight, was full of killer whales. And the whales would rub and feed and really actively use this area called Robson Bight. This was one of the beaches where they used to rub on the rocks. At first we thought these were very barnacle-encrusted rocks. They couldn't be rubbing, but in fact there was a place with smooth pebbles where they particularly came to play and rub, and bits of sand. And it's something unique to this northern community of orcas, a cultural activity that's passed on. So Robson Bight became what we and others, Paul Spong, Mike Bigg, John Ford, realized was a popular area for the northern community killer whales. We weren't calling this critical habitat or a core area quite yet. There weren't any words for that back then, at least in the ocean. I'll tell you how that core area concept came about. So in the late 1970s, after we had been coming back to see the whales every summer for 6 or 7 years, Macmillan Bloedel Limited, then Canada's largest logging company, announced it was going to log the Siga River Valley and send the logs down the river and create huge log booms stretching across Rob. And I talked to one of the owners, the vice president in charge of operations for Macmillan Bloedel, and he said, "Oh, there's no problem. The whales will probably just rub on the logs." So then over the next 2 to 3 years, we had this debate in British Columbia. Did we want killer whales or did we want log booms? And I ended up writing articles for National Geographic and other publications. And a fellow named Jim Borrowman and I and others did media interviews, and we made posters, and I learned about the power of expert views and assessments, even in the absence of papers, because there were no published papers on killer whales at the time that were talking about the importance of habitat. When I called up Mike Bigg and John Ford to ask what could we quantify about the whale's use of Robson Bight, they went back through their data and came up with a statement about how often the whales were using Robson Bight and how it should be considered a critical habitat core area. And this was really the birth of that concept in terms of killer whales and in terms of the ocean. And you can imagine killer whales trying to get a breath of air in between the logs, never mind rubbing. So the amazing result was that after debate in the legislature and public support, the orcas won. The loggers were not allowed to boom their logs in Robson Bight, and it was made an ecological reserve for the killer whale core area. And we felt really good about it, even though the the legislation was slow in coming and it was weak. And please take a look at this map. I've put a magnifying glass here. The killer whale reserve is a small area, about 7 square miles or 17 square kilometers for the land area. We didn't ask for anywhere near enough protected habitat. And there's essentially no budget for this area, no enforcement, no ecosystem management, and one catastrophic event like an oil spill outside the reserve could ruin everything. Now, besides log booms, why do whales and dolphins need protected habitat? The larger issue, there's too much ship traffic, ferries, tankers, commercial and recreational boats. There's the threat of collisions, oil spills, overfishing, the prey being removed, which is an issue with killer whales in some parts of the world. 300,000 whales and dolphins are caught in nets accidentally every year through bycatch. That's really a roaring guess, which was made quite a few years ago, and needs to be updated. Could well be far more than 300,000. And military sonar exercises and seismic surveys for oil and gas exploration have the potential to deafen whales and dolphins. And the larger issue is that all marine species, all species need protected ecosystems. And this is where the idea of ecosystem-based management comes in. So when a plan for marine protected areas, MPAs, or MPA networks, or zoning through marine spatial planning comes into play, the articulated goal is often ecosystem-based management, although this is still more of an idea and a dream than a reality. So where are we going with all this? This is kind of my brief roadmap. I'll start with talking about marine protected areas and whether they are useful as conservation tools for highly mobile whales and dolphins in a changing ocean. Are whales useful for making MPAs? Are MPAs useful for managing whale watching and whale behavior? What are the steps to maintaining healthy seas for whales? What can we do to make marine protected areas more effective as conservation tools? Are marine mammals on the road to adequate habitat protection? And how can we show the value of marine protected areas, whales, and whale watching to society? Now, Robson-Bite really set me on a path. I could say, I think the marine protected area people, when I got involved in the idea of habitat protection, seriously, really in the 1990s, I realized that the MPA people were not talking to the whale and dolphin researchers, and that's largely why I put together 2 editions of this book, Marine Protected Areas for Whales, Dolphins, and Porpoises, which was really a work over about 10 years. That was an attempt to get these people talking to each other. And I found about areas that were marine protected areas that had some whale and dolphin habitat, and I'll come back to that. So first, a few acronyms and definitions, and I will try not to throw around too many other acronyms after this. But protected area, PA, you can see the definition here, clearly defined space, etc. MPA, marine protected area in the ocean. And really, marine protected area is a generic term for many other names that are used in, they're different, of course, with different languages in Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay, but there are also different names for the same thing, and sometimes the same name means different things in different languages or different countries. The IUCN has tried to, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, has tried to sort this out partly with a rating system, which I'll show in a minute. I think the better marine protected areas use a biosphere architecture approach with zoning. I think that's very important. And I think we also must keep in mind always that MPAs are just one tool. There are other tools like International Maritime Organization directives to control shipping and shipping lanes. There are UN resolutions like the UN resolution to stop drift net and bottom trawling, which reduced it greatly, even though it didn't eliminate it. And so you have to think about MPAs as just one of the tools for helping with bycatch. So how do you protect highly mobile species? Humans identify with place-based conservation. That's partly the value of an MPA, because we think about a physical space when we think about protecting whales and dolphins. MPAs can serve as platforms for stakeholder engagement in ocean issues. Zoning is key. Having highly protected zones or areas with no fishing for sensitive habitats and for endangered species. I'm of the view that really endangered species, vulnerable species, should not be, there really should be no fishing in their core habitats, so that the problem of bycatch is greatly lessened. And the best MPAs have these zones that focus on protecting core habitats and being linked up into networks. And I think in the background of your mind, you have to realize we can't manage dolphins, we can't manage whales. What we're really trying to manage are humans and their interactions and impacts on whales in the ocean. So how useful are whales and dolphins for ocean conservation? Well, very useful. Humans identify with charismatic whales and dolphins. They can serve as umbrella species. If they get protected, lots of other species get protected. They're good indicators of the health of the sea. You have to think about in the 11 kilometers of ocean below the deepest parts of the ocean, the visible creatures that come to the surface because they need air are whales and dolphins, and to some extent seabirds and turtles. And really, if they're in trouble, then things are going on down below, and you better start looking at it. If they're present, that's a good sign that if they're present and they're healthy and they're feeding and the populations are good, that's a good sign about that particular part of the ocean. And of course, whales and dolphins fertilize and support life on the ocean floor and are important for carbon sequestration. What is a healthy ocean? Well, these are some of the signs. We all know this really. Thriving supply of food, uncontaminated waters, quiet waters, controls on boats that might be displacing, entangling, or striking whales in their habitat, functioning ecosystems from rivers to coastal areas to deep sea. A lot of times the ecosystem is not just the little patch of ocean where you often see that particular species, but it goes back in, far inland. The present management and future management of potential human threats is really important, and also consideration of the cumulative impact of those threats. Sometimes they are synergistic, and also having strategies to address climate change. And really, it comes down to having informed and engaged humans sharing the habitat and watching over the ocean. So are the answer? Again, they're part of it, I think. Not all MPAs are created equal, and this category system with the IUCN is an attempt to show the values of various kinds of MPAs. And really the category 1A and 1B are the really highly protected, no fishing areas that are the most valuable in terms of restoring habitat and protecting from bycatch and things like that. I mean, you can manage fishing to some extent in some of the other categories, up to category 6, which is the least managed, but it becomes more and more of a challenge as you allow more and more use of a protected area. What are the steps to maintain healthy seas for whales? We need to locate their habitats. They do return to the same places, but every population of every species has special requirements. starting a multidisciplinary, multi-year research program for cetaceans and their environment, very important. Photo ID, acoustics, it takes time. Need to identify the specific oceanographic conditions that are in that habitat, then evaluate the threats to cetaceans and their supporting ecosystem, establish good baselines and monitoring so that you may be able to do habitat modeling in future, and giving stakeholders a stake, the sense of place that comes from a marine protected area, provides those community benefits that we've talked about that lead to improved conservation. So working with researchers, stakeholders, and others to devise this ecosystem management plan. And I think we with the task force and whale and dolphin conservation got stuck on this first step of locating their habitats and realized we mainly had data for nearshore places, and there was a lot more work to do. And I'll talk more about that later. And looking at the available legal structures to devise management plans and to set up management bodies that work. That's another huge challenge in countries that don't have legal structures that will give good protection, even with a marine protected area. So globally, where do we stand with marine protected areas? Well, 7.9% of the surface of the ocean is protected. About 5.7% in actively managed marine protected areas, and only 2.6% in highly protected no-take reserves. On the high seas, which is most of the ocean, more than 60% of the ocean, only 1.2% of the high seas is protected. So the totally unprotected part of the ocean is about 92%. The UN target for protecting the ocean through the Aichi targets of a decade ago were to protect about 10% of the ocean by 2020. We didn't quite get there, but we got close. And now through the UN, the IUCN, and 100 plus countries have signed up to a new target of 30% protection of the ocean, effective protection by 2030. And a lot of people think that's going to be the minimum if we want to really protect the biodiversity that's in the ocean and for the ocean and for ourselves. Now, 5 key features of successful marine protected areas. Edgar et al. In a paper published 2014 identify 5 characteristics of MPAs that achieve statistically significant outcomes of fish population metrics. And these were including no take, well enforced, whether the MPA was older than 10 years, whether it was larger than 100 square kilometers, and it also, something they identified was that if it were isolated by deep water or sand, that could ensure protection. So Robson Bight, if we look at that, well, it's older than 10 years, but it doesn't have any of these other features and really doesn't come close to matching the tests. If we look at what is an example that might have features, well, the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, which is the northwest Hawaiian Islands, an area of sizable, larger than the Great Barrier Reef, is no take, older than 10 years, larger than 100 square kilometers, much larger, isolated, and reasonably well enforced. There were 3 commercial fishing licenses in that area which are being bought out. So it will be a highly protected area. Of course, some MPAs may start small and grow into an effective MPA, The first ever whale protected area in 1972 was the Laguna Ojo de Liebre, Scammons Lagoon, which was announced by Mexico in 71, protected in 72. And this was the place where gray whales had been slaughtered and nearly sent off to extinction. And so the Mexicans turned a graveyard into a protected area. And compared to other species of cetaceans, gray whales were an easy to define situation for whale habitat, as the whales were breeding there and raising their calves in that enclosed lagoon where they spent their winters. And this area was later expanded to include other lagoons where the gray whales went and the land and water around them. The Mexican government kicked out the big American boats and allowed local Mexicans living in the area with their pangas to do the whale watching. And this gave the community a powerful sense of ownership. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start in terms of giving stakeholder involvement. It was a good lesson. And this first MPA was then challenged and was under siege in the 1980s when Mitsubishi announced that it planned to greatly expand its salt works in the lagoon. And El Grupo de los 100, the group of 100 artists, writers, and others backed by conservation groups such as IFAW, led a campaign to oppose the salt works. And finally, the company capitulated, and it was a great victory. And it really became an MPA then. People had accused it of being an MPA on paper, but then it became an MPA. So El Vizcaíno Biosphere Reserve is probably more like the usual situation with an MPA, having some features to some extent, but not fully, still striving and getting better as people become more invested in it. And I think there should be one other feature on this list in terms of effectiveness, and that's a strong, engaged community of stakeholders. That's ultimately extremely important for the success of a marine protected area. If people don't care, it's not going to work. Now, I think here's an example of a successful marine protected area for dolphin habitat. In terms of the bycatch issue, the Banks Peninsula Marine Mammal Sanctuary, established in 1988 to protect New Zealand Hector's dolphin. It's measured before and after it resulted in reduced cases of dolphins getting caught in nets and increased survival rate. Hector's dolphins do need more protection than an MPA of 4,000 square kilometers. Essentially, it's been recommended that the New Zealand government should ban set nets and trawls in coastal areas almost all around New Zealand, up to 100 meters depth. But it's a start, and it proves that it can work. What's the current coverage of whale MPAs and marine mammal protected areas in the global ocean? Are they on the road to good habitat protection? Well, there are about 600 now out of 17,852 MPAs have marine mammal content, as I would call it. Excuse me. There's no coverage for most species. Certainly beaked whales, there are only a couple MPAs for beaked whales, for example. Ad hoc or incidental protection is the rule, and these areas are largely political or socioeconomic. So they might have started as habitats where whales or dolphins were found, but once they go into the discussion period and to the legislature and the politicians get hold of them, they get reduced and changed, and it's no longer exactly habitat. And also, if you look at the map, you can see that most of these areas are right around coastlines or around islands, and we're really missing a lot of areas offshore and certainly on the high seas. So why do we need to care about whales and the ocean and MPAs now more than ever? Well, the ocean is being carved up in pieces for hydrocarbon exploration of gas and oil and fishing and minerals in the seabed. The ocean is long been a motorway for world shipping, and we still have no regime for managing most of the ocean. And the UN is now working on a legally binding agreement. We're hoping to get that soon. The greatest pressures, though, are on marine mammals in coastal waters, bays, and rivers, like Franciscana situation. And we, of course, need to protect truly sustainable marine tourism, fishing, artisanal fishing, and other economic activities. But some areas need to be zoned for a high level. So, in light of the fact that there were these huge gaps about protecting the areas for marine mammals, a group of us set up the IUCN Marine Mammal Protected Areas Task Force to try to apply scientific process to identify habitats and to create a tool, a hands-on tool that people and different countries could use, and also international agreements like the Convention on Biological Diversity could use to create areas that were useful and important for whales and dolphins, and do it in a more systematic and comprehensive way. So this is the task force set up at the Marine Protected Area Congress in Marseille in 2013. And really we had a number of objectives, but this last objective, to enhance the capacity with new conservation tools, has been our dominant focus since we put the task force together and began on this road of creating important marine mammal area. We had guidance on the criteria with more than 1,000 experts, and put together 8 criteria and sub-criteria that you can see here, each with qualifying aspects and examples as to how we would protect, how we would use that criteria, and how we would adapt it to particular places. IMAs, IMAs, EMAs, IMMAs, no matter what you call them, they're a place-based conservation tool identifying discrete portions of habitat important for one or more marine mammal species that have the potential to be delineated and managed for conservation. They're not marine protected areas, and they're not identified on the basis of management considerations. They're evidence-driven, and it's a purely biocentric process in terms of identifying them. Nothing to do with political or socioeconomic aspects, just on the best available. So we have a 3-stage process for identification. Preliminary areas of interest are identified for a given region of the ocean. I'll show you the regions in a minute. And they go to a workshop with about 30 to 50 experts, and they then agree which ones they will propose as candidate IMAs and the boundaries for those candidate IMAs. And then those go, after the 1 week long workshop, to peer review, which takes several months, and there's a lot of back and forth between the proposers, the original points of contact, and the reviewers before the creation of those areas. This is just an example of what in the Northeast Indian Ocean and Southeast Asian seas. This was pre-workshop. The areas of interest looked like this, and then at the workshop, more areas of interest are often added, and then candidate IMAs are identified and proposed. Some areas just stay as areas of interest, and then this is after the review. You can just get an idea of, and sometimes after the review, areas are expanded or contracted. This is our work program starting in 2016 when we did the Mediterranean, and then moved to the South Pacific, and from there the Indian Ocean, Australia, New Zealand, the Southern Ocean, and most recently the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which will be online in another few weeks. We're hoping next year to do the northeast or southeast temperate and tropical Pacific along the borders from Mexico to Chile, the eastern tropical Pacific area. So that's second quarter 2022, and we are hoping to come to an ecosystem near you, near Franciscana, to include Franciscana in the fourth quarter of 2022. We have the funding to do this workshop. It's being scheduled. So right now we have 159 important marine mammal areas identified, 173 if you include the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which will be online shortly. The red areas, the orange areas are the IMAs. The reddish areas, pink areas, are candidate IMAs, which need a little bit more research to become IMAs. And the AOI, the blue areas, areas of interest, may become important areas in future with quite a bit more research. This is just the polar projection that gives you an idea of what we have there. Included soon. Now this is, let's see. Oh, when you click on a given area, you get more information about it, a summary, and then there is detailed maps and data that we have available that are accessible. And there's a lot of information on the website, along with the e-atlas, which is accessible by iPhone as well as on laptops. Looking as an overview, the largest IMA in the world is 2.8 million square kilometers, the Prince Edward Islands and Western Oceanic Waters, for fur seals, southern elephant seals, and killer whales. And the smallest is the Akrotiri IMA for Mediterranean monk seals. The total area of all 173 IMAs, 21 million square kilometers. 51% of the IMAs are less than 10,000 kilometers in size. Only 13% of them have greater than 100,000 square kilometers. And so far in the 7 regions that we've examined, mostly in the Southern Hemisphere, we've involved 205 experts, covered 35% of global waters, and 17% of the examined area is covered by IMAs, which involves 62 species, 18 of which are threatened. So this shows the searchable database, which you can go on and take a look. And here is the, you can download spatial layers, and we will shortly have the GIS layers available just by clicking on a link, so you can at least see what it looks like. If we don't use these areas, these IMAs, they're not going to be of any value just to have identified them. So what have we done in terms of using them? Well, the Convention on Biological Diversity, through their ecologically or biologically significant areas, is very interested in what we've done in terms of using the spatial layers for marine mammals. Marine spatial planning, the same thing, and more than 90 countries globally are already using marine spatial planning for their activities in nearshore to the entire exclusive economic zones. Marine protected areas and marine protected area networks. There are a number of areas that are being that are using IMAs already. Key biodiversity areas identified through IUCN are synonymous with at least 30 of our IMAs, and we've helped to identify them. The U.S. Navy conducts sonar testing and is using our IMAs for areas that they will avoid. And the IMO, we've met with them, and they're considering directions that will reduce noise. IWC also is using IMAs to identify ship strike areas. We have a resolution with the Convention on Migratory Species that acknowledges our criteria and process and requests the parties to identify specific areas where they can implement IMAs. These are some of the examples, some of which I said already, but the Bazaruto IMA, for example, in Mozambique, we went there a couple years ago and revealed threatened dugong and 10 humpback dolphin and Indian Ocean humpback dolphin habitat where there were oil and gas leases, and Sasol, the South African company, subsequently, after publicity about this IMA being created in the prime area and also the area where they had the oil and gas leases, they surrendered the leases. Proposed MPAs in Vietnam, Bangladesh, and a few other countries, as I said, are using IMA information. And that gives you a kind of a round. This is a real-world example of bycatch and ship strike affecting fin and sperm whales. The marine protected area, this sort of diamond-shaped area labeled, well, it's the Pelagos Sanctuary for Mediterranean Marine Mammals, was created in 1999 as a joint area between France, Italy, and Monaco. And of course, if we had our IMA workshop then, which didn't occur until 2016, that MPA would have looked different. As you can see, the orange area, the prime area for sperm whales and fin whales and some of the dolphins, extends west of the protected area. Now, this area had drift nets in the Pelagos Sanctuary. They weren't removed right away, but they have since been removed outside of the sanctuary, but they're still used. They're moved, but they're still being used outside of the sanctuary. There are efforts to control the fishing and ship strike issues in this area west of west of the Pelago Sanctuary, but it will take time. So I know that many of us resist looking at this in a cost-benefit scenario, but I think this provides us with additional support for conservation solutions when it comes to protected areas. And you can see here, I've kind of weighed on the scales the benefits to marine protected areas over the costs. But I mean, there certainly are costs, but we have to look at what we can achieve by protecting habitat, and these achievements could be substantial. And if we can calculate this in numbers that not only the politicians and industry will understand, but also the people generally, it will be that will be really important as part of the process to try and protect them. Of course, nature is priceless. It comes down to that. So where do we go from here with MPAs and whale and dolphin watching and IMAs? You know, I think we need to renew our relationship with whales and dolphins and the habitats that support them. You know, I think things like sustainability and the 1/3 time and space rules, you know, where you protect 1/3 of the habitat, highly protected, and you're able to do comparison studies and also look at how well protected the species are really important. If there's tourism, you need to diversify it more, you know, so they're not focused right on the individual whales and dolphins. Land-based is very important. 30% ocean protection in MPAs by 2030 is the goal. The BBNJ process, the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction through the United Nations, very important in terms of the high seas. And we're going to need new techniques like satellite images to detect whales, environmental DNA, a lot of acoustics, you know, that will extend off across ocean basins for monitoring and detection, plus modeling. And IMAs and MPAs with baseline studies can be used for this kind of monitoring against threats to cetaceans with bycatch and ship strike and climate. So I'm going to end here, and I want to leave you with a slide from the Commander Islands overlooking the open Pacific and the Bering Sea to the north, an area where I've spent a little bit of time. And for me, this is the true meaning of a marine protected area. During my summer visit here some years ago, we didn't see a single boat, no passing freighter or fish boat, no overhead plane, absolutely nothing but a sea full of whales. It's protected for 30 nautical miles around Bering Island, and we need pristine places like this, as well as our managed places with human use. I think that's one message I'd like to leave with this. You know, we need the quietness of the ocean and the original parts that created a healthy ocean to exist in some parts of the world if we're going to maintain it. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Doutor Erich, muito obrigada pela sua brilhante fala, por nos trazer tantas informações e tanta experiência de tantos lugares do mundo e aproximar essa abordagem da questão das toninhas. Eu vou chamar aqui o Renan que vai trazer as perguntas que foram apresentadas no chat. Renan, por favor.
Ok, obrigado, Marta. Então, eu sou o Renan Paitachi, eu sou um homem jovem, de cor branca, tenho cabelo e barba curta e castanho, estou com um moletom azul e estou no meu quarto, fundo branco embaçado. Então, eu vou ajudar aqui facilitando, passando algumas das perguntas aqui do chat para você, Erich. A primeira pergunta que a gente tem aqui, ela é do professor Paulo Simões Lopes, e ele pergunta o seguinte: Erich, o Brasil tem várias áreas marinhas protegidas, né? Aqui no Brasil a gente chama também de unidades de conservação, mas pouca ou nenhuma fiscalização nessas áreas. O Congresso brasileiro tem pouca representação de conservacionistas e raramente dá atenção aos problemas ambientais. Então a pergunta dele é se você poderia desenvolver um pouco melhor sobre essa fraqueza em relação à fiscalização que tem no nosso país.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'll say good morning, everyone. And I'm a Caucasian man with short gray hair and beard, and a maroon jumper. And I have a map of, I'm in my home office, but I have a map of the world with all the marine protected areas that have whales and dolphins in the background. So thank you, Paulo, for your question. So addressing enforcement, it's a huge issue. You know, it's one of the tools in terms of making a marine protected area work. The other ones are you know, getting the local people on side, you know, education. You know, I'm sure you know all of those different tools that are being used. But I think more and more what we're learning from this period of trying to create marine protected areas and make them work is that having zones for very high protection actually can make it easier for enforcement and for education. If you're trying to manage whale watching or dolphin watching and a lot of other activities in a mixed area, it can be really difficult. So that's one thing I would say to start to answer that big question.
Certo, Erich, obrigado. A próxima pergunta, então, ela vem aqui do pessoal do Instituto Mar, no Brasil. E eles, é semelhante, na verdade, a pergunta, né? Fala justamente sobre, bom, a gente sabe que no Brasil, né, e acho que na América Latina, podemos dizer, a gente tem sérios problemas socioeconômicos. E do seu ponto de vista, Erich, como que a gente consegue convencer os políticos e a população em geral, né, sobre a necessidade das áreas marinhas protegidas, considerando esse cenário de tantos problemas sociais e econômicos?
Well, I was trying to get at some of those issues toward the end of my presentation, and you know, trying to put a number on how valuable marine mammals are, and also how valuable a clean ocean is, you know, in terms of ecosystem services. There are economists who are working to try to put numbers to those things that we, you know, many of us here think are invaluable, you know, that nature doesn't have a price. But I think sometimes you need to have some actual numbers to take to the politicians and the powers that be. So that's one way. But you know, I think we are seeing a worldwide movement. You know, we have the COP26 conference coming in a couple weeks on climate change, and we're seeing that nature marine nature is a major part of the solution for protection of the ocean and leading to trying to deal with climate change. And I think that those big arguments are on the table as well as what we have in each local community. But it's something that requires not one strategy, but lots of strategies. I think you just put them down on paper and you just keep adding to them and do the best you can, tick them off and keep at it. It's time consuming, but that's what we have to do.
Com certeza, Erich. Bom, nessa linha, né, eu acho que a gente tem uma pergunta aqui agora da Bruna Marconato, que ela pergunta justamente um pouco pensando nisso, né, assim, essa coisa de como atrair as pessoas, né, a justificativa para se criar uma área marinha protegida, muitas vezes o aspecto do turismo, da possibilidade de observação dessa fauna, né, de mamíferos marinhos, de cetáceos, ela pode ser uma ótima justificativa para a criação das áreas marinhas protegidas. E aí ela questiona, né, queria saber um pouquinho o que tu comentasse em relação a isso, pensando que no caso da toninha, da franciscana, é um animal muito difícil de ser visualizado, né? Diferente de outros cetáceos, elas são praticamente, não sei se dá para dizer invisíveis, mas de muito difícil visualização. E as pessoas, quando elas procuram fazer o turismo nessas áreas, elas querem ver muitos animais, tirar fotos. Então, ela pergunta como você acha que poderíamos atrair a comunidade para apoiar uma iniciativa dessa, né?
That's difficult. I know with dugong in some parts of the world where we've worked, the people have not necessarily seen them, and yet we're trying to ask them to protect them. So there are cases like this. It's not like you have humpback whales. I mean, that's easy. People can see them and they jump out of the water a lot, and you can sell that. Sometimes you have to take other species to sell protection for one species. So other species lean on the more visible species. And so you're talking about, of course, with franciscanas being very close to land. It may be that other species are needed to really focus on, but also I think it's a case of stories, telling stories. And if you can if you can get people interested in a story that about what the animals are doing, and have that with social media and all the tools that we have now with good photographs and video, that can go a long way. People don't necessarily need to see it to see the animals. I mean, it's good if they can, but I think we just have to use what we have in order to try and do it.
Com certeza, Erich. A gente tem também aqui um comentário, na verdade, não é uma pergunta, do professor Paulo Hoyt, e ele diz: Erich, muito obrigado por sua palestra. Estamos muito felizes que haja um plano para iniciar um processo de IMMA no Atlântico Sul Ocidental, em 2022. Já identificamos algumas áreas de interesse e potenciais candidatos para essas áreas para a toninha no Brasil. Será um prazer discutir isso com você no futuro. E aí a gente tem também mais uma perguntinha aqui da Ângela Silva. Como é que está o nosso tempo aí de perguntas? Acho que a gente tem mais uns 5 minutinhos, 3 minutos. Vamos seguindo aqui. Ela coloca aqui, né, a Ângela Silva fala, né, no Brasil temos uma baixa efetividade das áreas marinhas protegidas e o planejamento espacial marinho ainda está no início. Você considera que a identificação dos IMMAs pode auxiliar no aprimoramento e implementação dessas importantes ferramentas? Acho que ela está se referindo à ferramenta do planejamento espacial marinho, né?
Yes, and we're seeing that already that IMAs are helping with the implementation of MPAs and IMAs. It's a kind of way that managers and governments can have a checkup to see, what they should be protecting, and or what a group of scientists from that region have established as being important. So we see the layer that we will have, because in effect, what we're creating with IMAs is a spatial layer that can be used for marine spatial planning. The important thing will be getting that IMA layer on the table and recognized along with all the other layers that other users will bring to the marine spatial planning process. And that'll be, we can talk about that when we do the workshop. We're really looking forward to it and to involving everybody that we can in 2022.
Legal, Erich. Acho que a professora Marta também tem uma perguntinha, vou passar a palavra para ela.
Obrigada, Renan. Na verdade, vou apenas fazer um fechamento. Acho que as questões que eu tinha já foram até apresentadas e não preciso me repetir, mas eu acho que é muito interessante a gente vislumbrar os desafios, né, que a situação das toninhas, que entendemos também que seja uma espécie bandeira, uma espécie guarda-chuva para os ecossistemas costeiros, e essa é a perspectiva, né, com a qual trabalhamos, mas que ela tem questões muito desafiadoras, que incluem o fato de ser uma espécie muito costeira, viver muito próximo da costa, depender desses ambientes e, ao mesmo tempo, ser tão difícil de ser observada. E aí nós temos essa situação dos países de ocorrência, né, que incluem comunidades em muitos casos, comunidades com muitas situações críticas, questões socioeconômicas importantes, comunidades que dependem daquela pesca muito costeira e que está ali nas proximidades das suas áreas de vida. Então, toda essa área de ocorrência de toninhas tem essa realidade socioeconômica que para nós é um grande desafio, mas fico muito feliz também com essa perspectiva de termos uma discussão mais ampla das IMMAs, que com certeza poderão contribuir em nível de políticas públicas aqui nos países, né, Brasil, Uruguai, Argentina, e eu acho que podem ser muito importantes, né, para que nós possamos avançar nessa discussão e na busca das alternativas, né, para lidarmos com essa realidade, né, das populações das áreas de ocorrência de toninhas. Então, agradeço mais uma vez, Erich, quiseres fazer uma fala de encerramento, se quiseres comentar alguma questão em relação ao que eu comentei há pouco, e agradeço novamente imensamente por suas contribuições, por sua excelente fala, e muito obrigada.
Thank you. I think there's a real, what you said about Franciscana being a flagship species, an emblematic species. I think there's a lot of currency there, a lot of value. And, I saw that happen, and I see it happening with the Hector's dolphin in New Zealand, which has very similar problems. You could create a really interesting dialogue, I think, with some of the researchers and government Department of Conservation working in New Zealand, because it's a gill net, it's a set net, they call them set nets there, same kind of problem. And that could be, they've addressed it to some extent, but, not as much as we feel they should, And one of the research, pieces of research that we did was trying to evaluate from people how much it would cost for them to change their diet of fish and chips, what value were the dolphins to them? and economists helped us with this, and it's I can send you a copy of this. I think there's some tools that might be available from places like this. So that's, yeah, I'm excited about what you're trying to do, and I admire you, and I'm really grateful for the chance to talk and introduce our IMA process to the researchers working in this region, and look forward to future exchanges. So thank you, Marta and Renan and everybody, and you know, let's stay in touch. Thank you. Yeah.
Muito obrigada novamente. Bom, eu agradeço então também a todos que nos acompanharam até esse momento, que estão acompanhando esse workshop. Aproveito para lembrar os inscritos de assinar a lista de presença, que estará aberta e disponibilizada, que já está aberta e disponível, e que permanecerá por mais algumas horas ainda após o final da atividade. E então chegamos ao fim dessa conferência de hoje, dessa manhã, e nos vemos novamente à tarde, a partir das 14 horas, quando teremos a mesa redonda 2, que vai falar justamente sobre mecanismos baseados em território para a conservação de toninhas, seguindo então a temática do dia de hoje, que se iniciou então pela fala do Erich e Hoyt, e acho que teremos então uma discussão muito rica, muito proveitosa aí com outras abordagens relacionadas ao tema dos territórios. Mais uma vez, obrigada a todos pela atenção. Erich, gratidão, e nos vemos em breve. Tchau, tchau.